If you think about it for just a second, it really feels like we are living the resurgence of 3D fighting games. We're getting a new Virtua Fighter sooner than later, and we just got an announcement for a new Dead or Alive game in the latest Sony State of Play, which was crazy and completely out of nowhere. But there was actually a moment in time in the late 90s and early 2000s in which fighting games that were 3D were the biggest titles, and every single developer, company and publisher wanted to imitate the success of games like Soul Calibur 2 and Tekken 3. And the consequences of that is that a ton of 2D franchises tried to go 3D, and in this video we are going to explore if they failed or not. And I also want to give a huge shout out to all the creators that are featured in this video, because since I don't have access to the systems in which I can play these games, I'm using a lot of footage from other YouTube channels. So a big thank you to all of these creators, all the credit to them will be on the screen of course. And now let's explore when fighting games went 3D and failed. And well people, I don't think we can talk about this retrospective without going over the case of Mortal Kombat first, because what Midway did with MK when they transitioned from 2D to 3D in this experimental era was actually incredible. Like the first game, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, sold over 3.5 million copies. It is arguably one of the most successful games in this era period. It doesn't matter that they went from 2D to 3D. And actually the only other Mortal Kombat games before Deadly Alliance that sold better were Mortal Kombat 1 and 2, literally the era in which fighting games were the novelty in the video game industry. So it is incredible that the first MK that went 3D was actually a big hit. And I gotta say, when you look at it with a retrospective like we're doing now, I think that it's simple to understand why Midway wanted to move MK to 3D and why people liked it, because the game before Deadly Alliance was Mortal Kombat 4. And at that point in time, MK4 was the worst selling Mortal Kombat game ever. Like, it was not even close to MK1, 2, Ultimate 3, anything, right? MK1 and 2 sold over 5-6 million, and then MK4, taking into account all of its versions, sold only like over 1 million. And the first version of MK4 only like 500,000, right? So it was kind of a flop. Like MK4 did not do well at all. And then we move into Deadly Alliance in 3D when everything's going crazy for Tekken, Soul Calibur, and people watch MK being 3D and it's like, dude, this looks sick. And the game actually is relatively feature rich, like it has cool characters, great game modes, the Conquest game mode, I know a lot of people still love it, and there was actually a ton of things to do in the game. So I believe that the move to 3D from MK that Midway did was genius. Like they actually hit all the points of why people were liking the other 3D fighting games, but applied them into the MK formula. And it was pretty smart from Midway. But all of this was actually not the end of the 3D era for MK, because after Deadly Alliance we also got Deception and Armageddon. And I know that a lot of people hold this game super close to their heart and memories, but sadly for Midway, every single entry after Deadly Alliance was doing worse in the 3D era of MK. Like all the way to Armageddon, the sales went down to only around 1 million. And we're talking about Mortal Kombat. MK is the biggest fighting game IP in the world at this point, and until today, arguably, after Street Fighter. Like the cultural impact of Mortal Kombat is gigantic. Everybody knows what Mortal Kombat is, even if you don't like video games that much. So it was pretty obvious as to why MK had to let the 3D era leave and go back to their classics with 2D. Hey, just in case that you've been enjoying the content until now, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to support the channel, especially if you enjoy content around fighting games. If you don't do it, your favorite 2D fighting game is gonna get transformed into 3D because the company that makes it is really stubborn and is gonna go bankrupt and you're never gonna see it again. Okay, like and subscribe. What do you mean that a game in which I can do this didn't do well? Oh yes baby, now we're gonna talk about the moment in which Street Fighter went 3D with the EX games. And I know that these games have a ton of fans out there, but I don't know how much Capcom likes them because they didn't sell that well. When you look at the first entry on the EX games, it sold around 1 million units, taking into account all the versions of the game, but that is not even comparable to the financial success, the tremendous bomb in terms of money that Street Fighter 2 was from 91 all the way until 94 with all the versions of Street Fighter 2, right? And Capcom very obviously wanted to imitate that financial success, and they couldn't do it with the X series just like they couldn't do it with the Alpha games. But it's actually super interesting that if you look into Street Fighter as an IP at this moment in time in their history and you zoom in, the EX games were not that bad. Like the first EX game, like I said, sold around 1 million, which is pretty similar to Alpha 1 and 2. And then 1 year after the first EX game, we got Street Fighter 3, and it was an insane flop. In terms of money, Street Fighter 3 almost killed the franchise. And we got another EX game before we even got Third Strike. So it is pretty interesting how the 3D era of Street Fighter that maybe some people consider a flop was actually more successful than a game that a big group thinks is arguably the best fighting game of all time. So the overall financial situation of Street Fighter as an intellectual property was incredibly rough at this point in time. Like Capcom was suffering because of everything that happened with Street Fighter, and it's not even close to the current state of the franchise with something like SF6. And of course, Third Strike went to be one of the most iconic fighting games of all time, but we gotta give our love also to the X series. Like the games have some insane combo routing and really hype gameplay, and even though they didn't achieve the legacy that maybe Street Fighter 3 did later, it still deserves some love. So let's give our round of applause to the EX Street Fighter series. Okay people, now is where things get even more spicy because we are gonna talk a little bit about the 3D era of SNK fun games, and believe me when I say SNK tried to go 3D really hard. Like we got 3D KOF, 3D Samurai Showdown, 3D Fatal Fury, even Vuriki 1, which is one of the most obscure 3D fighting games of all time, and SNK made it. So they actually were doing a really big effort to try and move into 3D and see if it got, you know, like a big financial success for the company. And well, when it comes to these games, like the 3D era of SNK fighting games, it was pretty rough, kind of a disaster to be honest, because not only is it super hard to find sales numbers of these 3D fighting games, but for example, Wild Ambition and Vuriki 1 were created for the Hyper Neo Geo, and that console, which was kind of like an arcade console essentially released on 1997, was a huge flop. Like it was not even close to the success of the original Neo Geo. So those games suffer a lot because of that. Like the system in which they were did not do well, and even though Wild Ambition had a port for PlayStation, it was still obviously not enough for the game to earn like enough money and sold a significant number of copies. And there are some reports and like an old interview online about KOF Maximum Impact, and that it sold like relatively decently, but still like these games were not necessarily the best moment for SNK as a company, and especially when you compare it to the case of Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and their 3D games, is not even close financially to what those franchises were able to pull off with that 3D era in comparison to the SNK games. But something incredibly interesting to me is that if these games were not super successful, then why did they happen so much? Like we got Wild Ambition and Vuriki 1 in the end of the 90s in the Hyper Neo Geo. Then from 2004 to 2007, if I'm not mistaken, we got 3 different games from Maximum Impact, and one of them that was only released in Japan. And then in 2008, we got a 3D Samurai Showdown with Samurai Showdown Sen. So like SNK tried to go 3D a lot. It's not like they tried once and then left it because it was a big financial failure. So we don't really know, maybe like the actual numbers, maybe these games actually did decently, but still they were not able to scale into like something bigger as a franchise with all the games. But I'm not super sure because having access to the sales numbers of these games, like I said earlier, is really tough. So I'm not gonna say like they were, you know, a success or anything. If not, we would be playing 3D SNK games right now, and we're not. But maybe they were not as bad as we think. I don't know. It's a pretty interesting story, and it kind of shows you that almost every single company tried to go 3D. And well, everybody, that was the video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing, especially if you like content about fighting games. I do video essays like this, guides, discussion about different games, etc. And let's hope also that this new 3D fighting game era that we are getting into with Virtua Fighter, with Doa, and hopefully with a new Soul Calibur is really successful, and fighting games keep getting better and bigger. See you on the next one. Take care and have an amazing day.